Imagine this. You are world famous. Maybe one of the most famous people in the world. You perform to sold out venues, and yet people aren't going to see you for the reasons that you wish they were going to see you. And the person who's exploiting you the most is the person who should love you the most. I'm Heidi, and welcome to Obsession, where it's our hobby to be obsessed with obscure history. Today, I'm going to tell you about the incredible life and afterlife of Julia Pastrana, a tale so strange and so twisted that it's almost hard to believe it actually happened. Like always, I'm going to get my trusty iPad and illustrate the story, which I always do. Julia Pastrana has many origin stories. Unfortunately, none of these stories were recorded by Julia herself. Most of them were stories that were given to her, and they were mostly outright lies. The origin story that I do like goes like this. Julia Pastrana was from a small village in western Mexico called Sinaloa. And in this story, some local herders were looking for lost sheep when they found a woman and her tiny child hiding in a cave. When the herders saw the little girl, it became clear why mother and daughter had been forced from their village. 2-year-old Julia was covered in thick, dark hair. The kind herders took the two exiles into the city, where it was decided that Julia would have a better chance of survival if she were handed in to the local orphanage. Soon, people began to talk about the orphan with the unusual appearance, and the curiosity of the State General, Senor Sanchez, was aroused. So, he went to the orphanage to pay Julia a visit. He was absolutely charmed. Julia was bright, sweet-natured, and engaging. He adopted her, but not with the intention of making her his daughter. While he had every intention of giving her a good education, her role was to be both a housemaid and an entertainer. Julia lived with the state governor until the age of 20, and we don't know much about her life in the Sanchez household, except that she acquired 3 languages and discovered a talent for singing and dancing. These qualities would have made her very valuable when Senor Sanchez wanted entertainment for his guests. Even with all her intelligence and accomplishments, Julia was mainly known for one thing: her unique appearance. It is now thought that Julia likely had hypertrichosis, a condition that causes extreme hair growth, and Julia had a quite severe case. She also had gingival hyperplasia, which causes thickness of the lips and gums. Of course, in the mid-19th century, these conditions did not have a name, and Julia's very status as a human was constantly being questioned. There is a lot more factual information about Julia's life after the age of 20, although the next part does have some contradictory details. Some people say that Julia chose to leave the Sanchez family when an American showman arrived with the offer of making her a star. However, There are statements from oral historians in the area who say that Julia was sold to him, and there are other reports that Señor Sanchez and the American showman became business partners and decided to exhibit Julia together. What we do know for certain is that she did go to the USA and she did become quite a big star. Sadly, however, she was most often billed as the bear woman, the ape woman, or, most offensively, the nondescript. Now, Julia was fluent in English, and she was more than aware of how she was being marketed to the public, and we can only imagine how this sensitive, intelligent woman felt about this dehumanization. She was a highly skilled performer who could sing opera, play classical guitar, and dance, yet the reason why she was attracting audiences in their thousands was because she was being advertised as an animal hybrid. Reviewers of her shows referred to her as it, and marveled at how she had so many human abilities. It was in New York that Julia signed on with a new manager, and it was this manager who would completely change the course of her life. His name was Theodore Lent, and he became Julia's husband. A happy ending, you think? Not quite. Julia was lucrative property, and her marriage to Lent made it impossible for Julia to ever drop their contract and sign on with another manager. Very convenient. Well, maybe there was a kernel of decency in Lent. Maybe he did love her for her generosity, her warmth, her wit, but the fact does remain that Julia's husband-manager billed her as the baboon woman, making it difficult to think of him as a man with good intentions. Julia did have friends in the entertainment industry who believed her to be happy in her marriage, so let's hope it was better than it looked on the outside. Now, we do talk about this in greater detail on the Hobsession podcast, so please visit us there for deeper analysis. At this point, Julia was performing at the Regent Gallery on Regent Street to huge acclaim and rave reviews. She then toured exclusively and was in Moscow in 1859 when she gave birth to a boy. Her beloved son also had hypertrichosis and sadly only lived for 2 days, dying of asphyxia. There had been serious complications during the birth, and Julia soon followed her son. It is reported that her last words were, "I die happy. I know I have been loved for myself." Well, we have no way of knowing if these were truly her last words, but we can hope that Lent was in some ways a good husband to her, since what he did after her death was morally grotesque. Lent paid £500 to have the bodies of his wife and child embalmed, and he sold them to the Anatomical Museum in Moscow. Yeah, and it gets worse, even though it's hard to imagine how. After some consideration, Lent decided to buy the bodies back from the museum and put them in glass display cases for exhibition. Just when you think a person can't get any lower. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. So, at some point in the tour, Lent was joined by a young woman named Marie Bartel, who also had hypertrichosis, just like Julia had. She was, as it turns out, his second wife. He'd met her a few years after Julia's death, and despite promising to never exploit her in the way he had his first wife, he forced her to be part of his show. It does get worse. It does. He changed her name to Zenora Pastrana and claimed that she was Julia's youngest sister. Not only did Marie have to perform to an audience, which she did not want to do, she had to perform in front of the glass display cases that held her husband's first wife and infant child. Yes, Julia and her baby were used as stage props. Marie, however, was soon to get her reprieve. Lent had begun to behave strangely, or more strangely than usual. When Marie caught him eating money, she took him to a psychiatric ward and was very happily rid of him forever. It's difficult to trace what happened to Julia and her child until 1921, when they were sold to a Norwegian carnival owner who tried to display them, but pushback from an outraged public forced him to put them into storage. The last time they were exhibited was in the 1970s, but by this time there was thankfully no tolerance at all from the public for this level of exploitation, and the exhibition was closed. They were again put into storage, where they remained for a very long time and were completely forgotten. Then, one day, teenagers broke into the storehouse. They thought Julia was a shop mannequin and played around with her until they accidentally tore off her arm. The police investigated and confirmed that they were, indeed, human remains. The body of the baby had been so badly chewed by rats that he had to be disposed of. They threw him in the bin. But, rest assured, someone with decency is about to enter this story, and some wrongs will be righted. An artist by the name of Laura Anderson Barbetta took an interest in the story of Julia Pastrana when her sister was involved in a theatre production about her life. In 2005, Barbetta petitioned the University of Oslo, where Julia's remains were owned by the medical department, for repatriation. Her idea was for Julia to be returned to Mexico to receive a proper burial. It took Laura 8 years to wade through the bureaucracy needed to make this happen, but in 2008, Julia was returned to her home country. It took until 2013 for the burial to take place, but Barbetta organized a traditional Catholic funeral service and internment in a Catholic burial ground, giving dignity and respect to a body that had been exploited, dehumanized, sold, and neglected for far too many years. To hear the conversation I had with Becky about this story, please look up Obsession Podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Podbean. Please like and subscribe. Stay safe. I'll see you later, and check out the drawing at the end. Bye.